Hi, everyone. This story is a very short, 1.5 page story, probably even shorter than the story of an hour, called Volar by Judith Ortiz Cofer. The publication date is 1993. Sorry for those of you who speak Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but the last phrase in Spanish is where the title comes from. Oh, if only I could fly. So we see the notion of flight in several capacities in this very short story, and we'll talk about it in a moment. So, the setting this story is placed in chapter 5, the very end of chapter 5, which is the chapter dealing with setting. Why is the setting so important? And there's a question on page 146 asked at the end of the story. Um, how does the combination of vagueness and specificity shape your response to the story and your sense of whom and what it is about? So she's vague about the time. She's vague about the city or where where in general it takes place. But specifically, we know it's in the barrio. We know it's in a section of the city, the Spanish speaking neighborhood. Um, we know that they live in poverty. They provide for their daughter, the mother and the father do, but they don't have enough money to visit Puerto Rico. And the mom and the dad discuss that before their daughter wakes up, although she hears them. She says in the kitchen, they would be discussing events in the barrio. Actually, he would be carrying that part of the conversation. So she is both dreaming and listening to their conversation about the cost of trying to fly and visit their family and go on vacation. The setting is also important because that notion of flight comes up as thematic. It's thematic because of where they live, particularly, but it's also thematic because of the notion of flying that the narrator, who is the daughter through her youth and adolescence, is dreaming about. She says on page 145, I would get on high window into the black lake of the, nope, sorry, sleek and hard as a supersonic missile. Once on the roof, my parents safely asleep in their beds, I would get on tiptoe, arms outstretched in the position for flight, and jump out my 50-story high window into the black lake of sky. So we know she lives very high, probably in a housing project, actually similar to Sonny and his brother as they were growing up in a brownstone that was very much like the housing project that Sonny's brother lives in now. So the specific vision that that Ortiz Cofer creates for us in the barrio goes along with the vagueness of the time and whatever city they're in order for us to concentrate on the two kinds of flight, the dreaming flight that the adolescent daughter experiences, as well as the literal flight that the mother and father want to do in order to, for both of them in their own versions of flight and visions, to get away from the barrio, to get away from this poverty, to try and escape. That's what the whole notion is escape. We see at the very bottom of page 145 more specifics of where they're living. Um, she would light a cigarette and look out the kitchen window. The view was of a dismal alley that was littered with refuse thrown from windows. The space was too narrow for anyone larger than a skinny child to enter safely, so it was never cleaned. That plus them being up on the 50th story really gives us, with just two or three sentences, a vision of the kind of setting in which they live and where they want to escape through flight. The characters, of course, I've already talked about the characters. It's a very short story with only three characters: the narrator, the mother, and the father. The narrator is a young girl. It could be Ortiz Cofer herself. Um, Ortiz Cofer, as we see from the little biography, is or she is Puerto Rican by heritage, although she moved to the United States. I don't know enough about her biography to know if this could possibly be her or she could be constructing someone else. Remember, though, if you go back to the narrative slideshow um, that I posted a couple of weeks ago, it discusses the notion of the implied author. So when an author could be could could be the narrator also, we have to differentiate them, though. We have to distinguish that the narrator and the author are not the same. So when there is a first-person narrator, which we've read a lot of stories that are first-person narrator stories, James Baldwin is not Sonny's brother, and Faulkner is not the townspeople in A Rose for Emily. Montresor is not Edgar Allan Poe. And in the same way, Judith Ortiz Cofer is not her young narrator. Although I feel like this story could be the closest one to Judith Ortiz Cofer, perhaps writing a tiny bit of autobiography. However, we still have to remember the notion of the implied author, that they are not exactly the same. Finally, we're on the last slide here. There are some themes in this story that we can talk about. Youth and adolescence is one. How one deals with maturing, growing, and wanting to be anyone other than oneself. And so this girl in the story is right on the cusp of becoming a teenager. We know that because at the top of page 145, she says, the way I saw into the private lives of my neighbors, my teachers, and in the last days of my childish fantasy and the beginning of adolescence, into the secret room of the boys I liked. So we know that she's having this dream about flight and becoming a type of supergirl, a superhero who will use her vision to look into private lives, but also to escape from her own poverty, from her own self. She, in her vision, is Supergirl with long, straight blonde hair, which leads us to another theme at the bottom, and that is the notion of American assimilation and living on the border between desiring to be American and fit in with America, but also leaning back towards one's Latin heritage and her Puerto Rican heritage. Those are some interesting juxtapositions. The youth and adolescence mingling with the ethnic heritage and that border that they're sitting on between American assimilation and Latin heritage. We see that not only with the narrator, the young girl, wanting to be white, essentially, wanting to have my legs would grow long, my arms harden into steel, and my hair would magically go straight and turn a golden color. We also have things like the princess furniture that my mother had chosen for me. So the white princess furniture. I think the word white is important there because that princess furniture is certainly a very American thing, to decorate one's room in a little girly way with the princess kind of furniture. And yet she is attempting to also escape from her poverty and herself at the same time. This same theme occurs in the dialogue between the mom and the dad, I think, when they mingle Spanish and English. Mi vida, please understand. Their desire to see their familia on the island. So this mingling of Spanish and English gives us the sense that they're living on that border, as many immigrants do. They speak their mother language, but They also are attempting to speak and fit into their new place, all the while dealing with poverty, dealing with growing up, dealing with the same kinds of things that everyone has to deal with. On the top of page 146, my mother would check the time on the clock over her sink, the one with a prayer for patience and grace written in Spanish. So the time is on the clock. They're in America. They have white princess furniture, but they're also speaking Spanish. And the prayer for patience to try to deal with their poverty in the barrio and the notion that they can escape, written in Spanish. So these are some things to think about with relation to this story, Volar, and how it particularly fits into the theme of setting, or the literary device of setting, but also has lots of other themes that Judith Ortiz Cofer was able to fit into a story of about, 1,000 words. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye bye.